Hello, my name is Mark Reid. I am a professor of rural entrepreneurship at Scotland's Rural College, where I'm also co-director of the Thriving Natural Capital Challenge Centre. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but this is a topic which is very close to my heart. I actually am chief executive of a spin-out company that focuses on impact. We train researchers from around the world, whatever they're doing, to understand how they can harness their knowledge, their evidence, to really make a difference. And so today I'm going to be talking to some of the evidence that I have garnered through my own empirical research and my reviews of the growing body of literature on impact, in particular in my book, the Research Impact Handbook, to give you some of the principles. But this is not just going to be theory, it's going to be practical. And in particular, as the slide suggests, this is about fast tracking this. Because no matter how much you want to achieve impact, very often it's stuff that gets left to the end. So we've done the research, we've done the project, and now, oops, we need to communicate this and try and make sure this gets used and actually makes a difference. And of course, by then it's often too late. And I want to start with this word benefit. So I've suggested that impact is simply benefits. Let's just do a find and replace. Wherever I've got the word impact in my mind, take it out, put back in the word benefit. And for most people, there's instantly a clarification. Great. So this thing that, is it knowledge exchange? Is it engagement? Not really quite sure what this is. Okay, if it's a benefit, then it's an impact. And there is mass confusion out there on this. So I regularly review grant applications. I recently sat on a funding panel looking at fellowship applications, and these were impact fellowships, and yet only 50% of them had a single impact objective in them. I've looked at impact case studies from across the UK, and again, the same problem. The number one reason that impact case studies fail is that they don't talk about impact. Now, clearly, all these people think they're talking about impact, but actually what they're doing is they're talking about engagement. And that's valid. Great. We need to engage. We need that pathway. We need to commercialize. We need to get that patent, and we need to do the public engagement. We need to write the policy brief, etc. But it's not until that engagement, that policy brief, that patent or whatever it is, has actually now started to be used by someone in a way that is beneficial for someone or something, that we actually have impact. I regularly meet people who are famous. They're on TV on a regular basis. They have all of this public engagement behind them, people who regularly engage at high levels in policy. But is anyone listening? If they are listening, did they understand anything you said, or did you just speak in jargon? Maybe, in fact, you offended the people who listen to you on TV. Maybe the policymakers misunderstood what you said, are now doing something in your name which is completely not what you thought and is probably not going to work. Who knows? So the engagement, great, it's important, we need to do that, but we need to follow this through to check that at least, at minimum, someone somewhere understands something important that they didn't understand before. You've probably realized, though, that this idea of impact as benefit is a little bit simplistic. So let's think a little bit more deeply about this, because when we ask the question, who benefits, we realize that this is a little bit more subjective, because what might be a benefit to me might be the opposite of a benefit for you. And just go into the policy domain to realize what one group of people want and support as a policy, another a group of people hate and are being perhaps even harmed by. The same group in a different time or context may perceive something as a benefit or as harmful to their interests. So for that reason, in the Research Impact Handbook, I defined this as the good that we as researchers do in the world, or we as working with researchers using evidence and knowledge do in the world. And I've used that word good to emphasize that this is a value judgment. My good might be your bad. And in my 2021 paper, which is the first peer-reviewed cross-disciplinary definition of impact, I've used this word perception to emphasize it's not just what you can demonstrate, it's how that is perceived by different groups that also matters. And so I want you to have a think about this, see if you can deploy my definition, whether you take the good or the benefit as the way that you understand impact. And start having a think about some different categories of impact. And we're going to build a typology. This is powerful because it helps you to think out of the box, not the typical things that you or people like you might look at. So for me, as an environmental researcher, environmental benefits, but what about these economic benefits and social benefits? But as we go through this list, technological benefits, health and well-being benefits, cultural benefits, I've actually mixed one in here that is not a benefit by definition, if you accept the definition I've given you. And now all of these are in the published peer-reviewed literature, so you can be forgiven for thinking, that's a bit challenging, Mark, but have a think about this. And a common answer I get is, well, economic, clearly, because people think about the trade-offs. And we can all think of economic impacts, which actually have had huge negative environmental, social, health and well-being side effects, unintended consequences and the like. But that doesn't mean to say you can't still have an economic impact. You just have to think about the interactions. Another common answer is cultural. Well, what even is that, Mark? And let's just think about this. It could be a national culture. We now have a culture of not drinking and driving in this country. And this is not just a law. There's a culture that people just instantly talk to each other about in the pub. So we've done that in Britain. It could be a subculture. It could be an organizational culture. It's hard to measure. I did a project for UK government, UN and research councils. This was the National Ecosystem Assessment. And our task was to look there at how you can measure these cultural impacts. We were looking at environmental interventions in particular. And as part of the brief was how to evaluate the spiritual benefits of nature. And we did it. We employed a divinity professor, a philosopher and an economist, and it's possible you can do this. It just takes a bit of time and effort. So it is possible, just hard. And so give yourself a pat on the back if you were veering towards technology, because technology in and of itself is not an impact. The technology is an important pathway. It's an important stepping stone. Great. I've got an idea that might change the world. I've even patented it. But we can all think of examples of incredible ideas, even that have been patented, that nobody ever uses. They just fall flat. Or worst case, actually, when they go into the real world, they have negative unintended consequences. And we can all think of examples of technologies that were invented for good reasons that have subsequently been used to kill, maim, and destroy. So technology, great, great stepping stone pathway, but I need to understand how this is actually working and whether there's a benefit or not. And at that point, it's in one of these other categories. Now, at this point, we've got a problem because here are 5 impacts, but the evidence suggests that on average, these will take decades to appear after your original research. 2 projects using different methods in the health and well-being space came up with an answer, 17 years. A book recently published in the UK looking at the top-rated impact case studies. It measured this in decades. The majority of the case studies published in 2014 had their roots in research done in the 1980s and 90s. So that's a problem. Because businesses, policymakers, others want answers and they want them now. And in fact, we need answers now, given the scale and pace of some of the things that we're trying to tackle, especially in the environment space. But there's a more of a moral dilemma here as well, because we often ask these stakeholders to engage with us for the journey. We ask them to come to our workshops, to feed into the process. And it can feel very extractive. So I work for IUCN, their UK Peatland Programme as their research lead, and we're constantly invited to workshops. But very rarely do we get much back. And we're often not even sent the papers, which ultimately don't appear until 5 years later, by which time we've kind of moved on and solved the problem another way. And so we need to think about some of these early stage impacts as well. And so another question for you, I'll leave it rhetorical again, but can you think of some early stage interim impacts that still meet my definition of impact as a good or a benefit? They're not just engagement or pathway. And the example I've given you already is this idea that, well, great, we've engaged, but at least someone now understands something that they didn't understand before. So a common one for me is I'll work with a policy team to point out this great idea they've got, this strategy they're developing, or whatever it might be. There is some research here that suggests it's not going to work, or there'll be a negative unintended consequence. And the answer I always get back from my policy colleagues is, great, thanks for spotting this. So how do we solve it then? And typically I don't have an answer, sadly. But the point is that they now know that there's a problem. They can put it on pause, they can do the research, they can ask someone else, but ultimately, yeah, they're not going to introduce something that could cause harm or damage or whatever. This could be, I don't know, that episode of Blue Planet with all of the plastic that led to a global, in particular, especially to start with, a British consciousness that this is a problem. And whether or not we've solved that problem yet, the fact that we all now know there's a problem, that you can argue, if this is an important enough issue, that is an impact. Now, I'll give you a few more of these, but starting to the left of the screen here, you can see these are things which might happen quite quickly. It's a call to a policy friend. But you can always argue that they're kind of weak. I want to know what happens next. So how did you solve that problem? And the same applies to capacity building. So great, we now have skills, but I want to know how you're going to use those skills. We now are prepared for disaster, but until disaster strikes, we don't know whether that preparedness was good enough, etc. So let's build this. Let's do training. Let's turn our data into a database, into a decision tree or decision support system or something like that. Perhaps some of that then feeds people's understanding, that perhaps changes attitudes, which perhaps changes behaviors. Some of those behaviors are decisions, some of those decisions are policies, whether that's local, national, whether it's guidelines, whatever it might be. Some of those policies then influence these end of pipe solutions at the other side. We've enhanced the environment, we've reduced greenhouse gas emissions or whatever it might be. And as I spoke, I've drawn some causal chains. And so now what we have in front of us here is an impact typology, a checklist you can use to say, right, I'm focused on environment, but what are the other co-benefits I might try and achieve at the end of this process? What are the other things that I will try and achieve on my journey that are actually impacts that I can claim, that I can give back to people? And how will I order these? So one thing leads to the next, leads to the next, and increases the likelihood of those ultimate, longer term, more impressive impacts. Now, I want to make sure, ideally, that some of this is attributed back to my research, if I'm a researcher. But as researchers, we can do evidence syntheses, and we should be doing more of that. And if you're not a researcher, it doesn't really matter who it is, as long as this is high quality evidence. So I'm less interested in attribution than I am in the quality of the evidence that we're using. But ultimately, we need to make sure that this works. And so we start small, we try these things out, we evaluate as we go. And if it doesn't work, we course correct, rather than trying to start nationally and then having national unintended consequences. So we start small, we get something that is genuinely significant, and then we try and achieve reach. But to sum up what works, and this is something that I've come back to again and again in my work, especially in the Research Impact Handbook, I'm going to give you a metaphor and a word, but this is important, because unless we understand fundamentally this principle behind what works, we will waste time and we'll do things that ultimately don't work, or worst case scenario, have negative unintended consequences. So I went to London South Bank and I drew a smile, and my colleague and I walked down the streets and we grinned at random passers-by. And we did this as a metaphor, which is that good ideas are like an infectious smile. They spread through the warmth of human connection. And it is this empathic approach which is fundamentally what works if you want to achieve impact. So in my book, I've got 5 chapters that map onto these 5 principles, but at the heart of each of these principles is this idea of empathy, the idea of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. This is my daughter wearing my own shoes in my front garden. But it's this imaginative step. I'm not just now doing research for other people, but doing it with them, really understanding their needs, their constraints, their hopes, their fears, so that we do something that will actually resonate. And of all the things that might work, that one thing that will really deliver, that will really make a difference. And I can try and do that from my ivory tower at the end of my project and lob out a few ideas from my own imagination, but very rarely does it work. Typically, this is a bit of a scattergun approach, which is why you waste time doing all this stuff, but actually none of it's meeting its mark. Actually, some of these ideas that I throw out from my top window are squashing people inadvertently, negative unintended consequences. Now, had I not even bothered building that tower, had I just reached out to find out who these people are, who might just even vaguely be interested in my research to start with and have those conversations, I might have found the one thing that would actually matter if I could do that. And I might have then designed my research around that instead. And so I want to conclude with 2 tools that can enable you to systematically take that step of empathy and then build on that to create a powerful impact plan that will enable you to design impact into your work. So the first of these is stakeholder analysis. You can see more in my book, the Research Impact Handbook, and open access in my peer-reviewed articles and also in my blog. My next paper on this is a technique known as 3 Eyes stakeholder analysis, which I'm going to give you just now, which is on my blog. And it simply asks 3 questions. Who are these people who might be interested in our research or not, as the case may be? I'll come back to the or not. Who of these people then might have influence, either to facilitate or block my research or the impact that I want to have with that research? Again, or not, I'll come back to that. And who then is directly going to benefit or be harmed by this? I need to think about both sides of this. And I put all these together and I can see there's some organizations out there, some groups of people who are really interested, influential and impacted. I need to knock on their door. They may not be knocking on my door. So I reach out to them. And I do so in a way that is tailored to their interests. It's not just, here's me, here's my research, my project, can we talk? Delete. It's, here's you, here are the challenges that I can see you're facing. Here are your operational objectives. Here's how our work might be able to help. Can we talk? Great, let's talk. And now I've got an organization for whom my impact is their impact. They want this as much as me. And now together with them, we can achieve big things. And I might have very limited resources, but now with their resources, we can achieve far, far more. But we can also use this to identify those hard to reach, vulnerable, perhaps marginalized groups who are not interested in what we're doing, at least in the way that we're currently framing it. Our task is to make this relevant enough for them and to take this to them. By definition, they have no influence. They are the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed. But they may be impacted either positively or negatively more than anyone else. And it is a moral imperative that we reach out to them and prioritize them despite how hard they may be to reach. And so this is an individual task for you to do after today. Go to my website, fasttrackimpact.com, go to the resources page, and you will be able to download this and all of my other resources. And simply fill this out. It takes half an hour. You can do it with your team. Maybe it takes an hour. Maybe invite a couple of stakeholders and do it as a workshop. Maybe it takes a bit longer. But this is the insight now that enables you to work out who these people are that you might want to engage with. And your next step then, and the final step I'm going to come to before I conclude, is that you talk to those people in that tailored way. This is not a broadcast email. I'm reaching out to the top 1, 2, 3 organizations that I think might be most important to reach in that tailored way. And now I've got those conversations, I can ask them, what is the impact you would like to see? Now let's get to know you. Let's get to understand your operational context, your limitations, your hopes, your fears. And in the context of that conversation now, I can co-produce an impact plan. Now, that could be a workshop where we actually use some of these tools together with our stakeholders, or it could just be a bunch of conversations that and then informs my impact planning. Again, more in my book and in my peer-reviewed papers and on my website. And this is what you can download. There's a work example on the download from my website. And we're starting here with columns 2 and 3 from the stakeholder analysis. Who are these people? What are they interested in? And what is the benefit, having spoken to them, that we might try and achieve? What are the activities? They're going to tell me what would engage people like them and help people like them to understand the research, to get those benefits. What are the indicators that the activities are working, that we're actually getting somewhere to it in terms of impact? And what are the risks, the assumptions we're making? How can we mitigate them? Who's going to do what and when? Do we need some resource? How are we going to make this stuff happen? And great, we've got a plan. Now, I'll do this with a few different stakeholders. We'll come up with a lot of different ideas here. Ultimately, you have to prioritize 1, 2, maybe 3 goals that you're going to really invest in. We manage expectations around the things that we can't do. Maybe that's a future project. Maybe talk to my colleague. But now we're going to focus on at least one thing that I now know is something that really matters. I've got people batting on my team, helping me with this, and we're co-producing this. We've worked out how we're going to do it, what the activities are. We've got the resource, so we've made the plan, and now this is something that is actually going to happen. So here's a work example, too small to see, but pointers, go to my website, download my resources, and engage. I'm out of time, but before I hand over to David, this is how to get back in touch with me. So if you go through my company, PA, Maddie, then I will guarantee a response within a week to any query. So please do let me know if you have any questions arising from what you've learned from me today. You can get all of my latest resources on impact from both my website and my Twitter stream. And if you want to engage with me more, I've got a whole series of free training and discussion groups coming up. Just go to my Impact Culture website. So that's just fasttrackimpact.com/impact culture. So hopefully that's been useful.